Welcome to Architectural series titled Architects Talk or Conversations with Architects. Today we have a very distinguished guest, Sir David Chipperfield. Welcome to Turkey and welcome to this series. As far as I understand, you are one of the most admired foreign architects in Turkey, in the territory of Turkey. You are representing a quite unique, different place within contemporary British architecture and within British architects, compared with Foster, Rogers, and even Alshap maybe. For example, you are representing a more conceptual sense of architecture, freed from any stylistic pre-engagement, and more contextual in that sense. How do you locate yourself within the British architecture and within the contemporary scene?
Well, I studied at Kingston School of Art and then the Architectural Association, and then I worked for Richard Rogers and for Norman Foster, who I have great admiration for. And then I started my own practice, and my first 3 buildings were in Japan, and most, I would say, 90% of my architecture has been outside of England in the last 30 years. So
more than 40 countries.
Possibly.
It says when I look at your CV.
Possibly. It feels like it. So although my background is English, and I am English, and my formation is clearly from there, my professional experience is quite international. And therefore I would say that I don't necessarily position myself consciously in relation to the British architectural scene. In some ways I disengaged from the British architectural scene because in the 80s this was a difficult commercial time and even a difficult cultural time, you know, with Margaret Thatcher really making a big and radical cut into culture and the role of artists and creative industries. You know, it was a sort of negative period in a way, and
but also it was promoted as if it is a kind of a emerging new architecture, everything that comes with the Prince Charles and the Kriye, etc., the postmodern discussions.
Well, there was, I mean, that was a bit earlier. Yes, it's true, the late 70s, early 80s, there was this strange moment. So in England there was this coincidence between, in a way, a sort of a political, very strong political condition under Thatcher, an economically difficult moment, and then also, one would have to say in a way, that the final death of modernism, announced by this, at the time, quite interesting idea of looking at history again, what became called postmodernism. But this was an interesting moment because there was a sort of, yes, a sort of collapse of confidence in everything, but a new confidence in history. And so the architectural heroes of Le Corbusier and Alto and Mies, and you know, the standard formula that we were educated on became expanded. You know, the menu of legitimate architects to consider was considerably expanded into Lutyens and Leverance and all sorts of other. So all of a sudden there was a new energy coming at this moment in terms of architectural style and form discussion about the city, a discussion about history.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. That was a very interesting moment. But to return to your question, in a way, where I sit within the English condition, has been professionally, I've been quite released from that. But absolutely, that moment, I would say, when I was just finishing my studies, or in the period I was finishing my studies when I was studying, this very charged moment where I wouldn't say modernism died at that moment. It had been dying for quite a long time, but I think finally there was really a sort of the last breath of, and I think that was a very interesting time, and especially there wasn't much work, so people were talking a lot, drawing a lot. You talk about Leon Krier, so there was much more theory, much more discussion. The Anglo-Saxon world, I mean, certainly in England for the last 15 years, there's been a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And conversely, not much theory, and not much discussion, and not much thought.
Turkish architects, or at least in Istanbul, you have an idea about what is newly built and how it looks like.
No, but I think the difficulty for Istanbul, as many cities, is not one of architecture.
Mm-hmm.
Simply, I think it's one of protection,
Mm-hmm.
Protection and development, and this is, I think, the crisis of all contemporary cities, and especially those cities which have more to protect or more to lose. Is how do you develop, and how do you accept investment and growth, and all the things that come with that, at the same time not lose
Mm-hmm.
what defines the city already.
That's true.
And this comes both in terms of hardware and software. So you can protect maybe certain buildings. I mean, first of all, we all know that we can protect monuments. It's not difficult to protect monuments.
Yeah.
I mean, no one's going to knock down.
Everybody can foresee that, yeah.
Okay, we have a consensus internationally that you don't destroy churches and mosques and these things, and highest level buildings. However, the city is not made only from monuments, it's made from secondary and tertiary architecture. And this secondary architecture, or even tertiary architecture, sometimes can contribute an enormous amount to the quality of the city. So can you protect those more vernacular architecture, especially in the center of the city where maybe you have 3-story housing and everybody would like to come and build 20-story towers.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing. The second thing, let's imagine you can,
Mm-hmm.
because there's an increasing understanding that to take away very beautiful old buildings, even if they're in a poor condition, is less legitimate now than it was 20 years ago, let's say. This happens at different speeds in different countries, depending on the field. The second aspect, which is slightly more difficult and much more complex, is the software. Is how do you keep communities
Mm-hmm.
in cities? So let's imagine you say, okay, these buildings are very beautiful, let's keep them. Let's not build new buildings there. But in order to restore those buildings, normally someone wants to increase their value. That
Mm-hmm.
means moving those people that are living there away and turning them into shops, or in that way you have another type of problem.
Especially in cities like Istanbul, where hundreds, thousands, millions of people are migrating from Anatolia to Istanbul.
But also the quality of the city is still, in a way, the problem for Istanbul is there's too much life in the city.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a nice problem.
Mm-hmm.
And coming from a northern city, where we don't have enough life, or the only life we have is consumer life. So people come into the center to shop and eat, and then they go out again. We don't have people making screws and selling rubber pieces for pipes.
That's true. Yeah.
This is a type of urban mixture. This is why we like cities. This is why we made cities. And in the north of Europe, we are destroying our cities because we're putting anything that isn't high value.
Keeping the buildings but destroying the cities. You mean?
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yes. Would you like to add anything?
No, I mean, I think this last point for me is a theme, an expanding theme for society, that we have to try and understand. I think we shouldn't be seduced by the idea that a few good architects making a few good buildings is what architecture is about. And we've a little bit moved our view of architecture onto this sort of star architect, the object, and there's sufficient numbers of them, which are nice. And in that process, we forget, 99.999% of the world, the fit of our built world, which is not being looked after in the same way. And I think this is our challenge, and especially as investment becomes a necessary, way of cities surviving. How do we stop that exploitation?
Get out of that vicious circle, maybe. Yeah. Thank you very much for being with us, for joining the series.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you.